We have the great Joachim here with us. He is currently a postdoc at a16z Cryptography, and he's going to talk to us about the role of clients and consensus.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here again. Great to talk with you. I'll be talking about the role of clients in consensus, or consensus under adversary majority. Before I get started, I have to give you some disclaimer because I work in industry now. None of what I'm about to say is any form of advice whatsoever. Okay, not investment, not legal, not tax, not business, or any other advice. I'm purely here for entertainment purposes. So let's get started with the entertainment. We're trying to build a blockchain. What's a blockchain? A blockchain is a magic computer in the sky, basically. Right? So a blockchain is a way for us to get to build a protocol to get this sort of abstraction of a computer that is like a virtual computer, right? Where everybody can read from that computer, everybody can write to that computer, like provide input to that computer using some egalitarian interface, right? Nobody can stop the execution of the computer or corrupt the execution of the computer, right? And that's important because we can use that virtual computer that's like fault tolerant in order to run important applications that we want to be fault tolerant, such as voting, money, perhaps databases, and so on, right? So the idea is we're gonna run some sort of a protocol among a bunch of parties, right? And then from that emerges this virtualized computer. Okay? So how do we actually go about doing this? Basically in two steps, right? First is we run what is called a consensus protocol. You'll see a little more detail what I mean by this. But I'm assuming also most of you are well familiar with this, right? We have inputs to this computer. We decide on some sort of an ordering. And then once we have the ordering, everybody locally has the same order of inputs. We feed everything into a deterministic state machine. And so we all get a replica of that state machine that is running kind of in the sky. Okay, so this is called state machine replication consensus. And it's a protocol that is run by a bunch of parties, right? And an important question in state machine replication consensus is the question of what is the resilience of this protocol, right? What is the maximum fraction of adversary parties running this protocol that we can tolerate while the protocol is still secure? Okay, if you're following this area, then there's a bunch of numbers sort of floating around, right? 33% is one for protocols that we can call PBFT style protocols, for example, hot stuff or Casper FFG. 49% is another number, right? For Nakamoto style consensus protocols like Bitcoin or Boros, or for synchronous community protocols like Sync Hot Stuff. And then maybe you've seen this last number, right? 99%. So there's some papers from a few years ago in SMP, and there's also a blog post by Vitalik Buterin, the founder of Ethereum, proposing this kind of an idea. Okay, so we have three numbers. What's the right number? Right, very natural question. Now you say, well, there is a bit more detail to this, right? Like the first column of protocols are under what we call partial synchrony. That makes the assumption that the network is, often good, but sometimes it could also be asynchronous. And the middle column is under synchrony. But then also, okay, so that explains part of it, but then also seems like the last column is also under synchrony. So there seems to be a contradiction, right? On the one hand, there is the Vitalik's blog post, a guide to 99% fault tolerant consensus. And on the other hand, if you look in the literature, for example, in this paper by Ling Ren and his student, Atsuki, they have a theorem which essentially means, oh, you can't do better than this 50%, right? What? So what do we do with this, right? So this is what we want to resolve today. In order to understand this, we need to dive a little bit deeper into sort of the setup of the system. Okay, so what exactly happens in a blockchain? We have transactions. They're input to validators, we call them, a bunch of nodes basically running the protocol, right? And then somehow they decide on an output log, right? On a consistent ordering of these transactions. Okay. Crucially, for these validators, right, we have a public key infrastructure, so we know who they are. They can sign messages. We can make sure the message comes from this validator and nobody else, right? And some of them may be malicious, but we have some sort of a threshold honesty assumption. Okay, not all of them can be. That's this resilience number, right? Not all of them can be bad. Some of them, most of them must be good. Okay? Okay, so this setup here, right, is actually not what we do in blockchain, right? There is a small detail missing here, right? This consensus flavor where the validators are outputting these logs, right? We would call atomic or total order broadcast, right? And that's not what we do in blockchain, because in blockchain, we have another entity sort of in the picture, right? Namely clients, right? Clients are parties that are not, they're not staked, they're not mining, right? For example, merchants that are following the chain, right? Wallets, explorers, right? So really, right, there is another entity, the clients, and it's the clients who output these logs. Okay, and then on the clients, we don't have a public key infrastructure, right? They don't have keys. We don't know how many clients there are. They cannot sign messages, right? Some of them may even be malicious, right? But in particular, we also don't have any threshold honesty assumption, right? It could be that the adversary sort of spins up a bunch of clients, maybe 99% of the network is malicious clients or something. Okay. So this is now the state machine replication flavor of consensus. This is the thing that we're after, right? And so now you already noticed previously we looked at these protocols, right? And we said synchrony, partial synchrony, and so forth, right? That was all sort of about this side of things, like what's the network between the validators? But the question we're asking here, and that we need to look at in order to understand where these different numbers come from, is what are the assumptions that we have on the clients? Right? What do we know about how the clients interact with the validators and with each other, and sort of characteristics of the client?
Are these clients same as the learners in a Texas?
Yes, you should think of them that way, exactly, yes.
Are the clients able to update or change the blockchain, or they can only read the blockchain?
Excellent, yes. So there's one aspect to this I'm gonna answer, which is, in theory, like in practice, these transactions come from the clients, right? So we're gonna ignore that part. We're gonna say, okay, the transactions somehow come from the environment, right? The more interesting part is, maybe that was not what you meant, but like, can clients send messages, for example, right? So there's some limit on this, right? Because we don't have a public key infrastructure. So if they send messages, how do we tell that it's a good message, right? But that's where it becomes interesting, right? So now we can look into, okay, what client models do we have, right? And that explains these two different numbers. So in particular, this number 49%, right, comes in a setting where we have what we call sleepy silent clients. On the other hand, this number 99% comes in a different setting, which we call always on and communicating clients. What do I mean by that? Sleepy clients are clients that are not around for the entire protocol execution. Okay, maybe the blockchain starts in 2015 or it starts in 2025, right? And in 2030, somebody decides that they now want to be a part of this, right? They want to start accepting payments on that chain, right? Then they are a sleepy client, right? They wake up sort of 5 years after the system started and they haven't been following the system from the start. This is in contrast to always on clients, right? These are clients that they're around from like day 0 and they stay around for the rest of the execution. The second aspect is silent clients. So silent clients are, basically non-interactive, only receiving client. This goes back to your question, right? So silent clients are clients that they receive a message and then all they can do is sort of, okay, they need to do something with that message, but they can't like, send anything or relay anything or forward anything. This is in contrast to communicating clients. So we said already, okay, clients can send messages. There's certain limitation on how useful this is because we don't know whether this message came from an honest client, but communicating clients can at least sort of gossip things, right? They can forward what they got, right? And if we're in a synchronous setting, then we can trust that if they forward something, within the delay bound later, everybody else will have also received that information. And that'll turn out to be crucial. Okay. Now that we have this sort of characterization, right? These are kind of two different dimensions, right? The first dimension is sleepiness versus non-sleepy versus always on. The other dimension is silent versus communicating. So very natural question. Okay, obviously solving consensus in this setting is easier than in this setting, because everything that a client can do here They can also do here, but they can do a little bit more here. But in particular, given these two dimensions, right, there are two client models now that, as far as I know, nobody looked at before. Right? So what happens to clients that are always on but silent? Right? And what happens to clients that are sleepy but communicating? So this is what we want to look into. So the first order result, right, which we get is that in both of these settings, the resilience that we're looking at is still 49%. Okay? At least in terms of like the maximum resilience, we characterize this, right? But now I wanna do one more sort of order you with one more complexification, like make things one step more complex, okay? And that is I want to sort of decompose this resilience. Okay? So what is consensus again, right? Consensus security is the following, right? There's two properties, safety and liveness. Safety is bad things don't happen, right? All clients confirm transaction in the same order. And then there's liveness, which is good things do happen, which is for every input transaction, eventually that transaction will be confirmed. Okay, and traditionally, the problem that we started out with, right, is one of resilience, right? What's the maximum fraction T of adversary validators so that the protocols remain secure, right? So that we can satisfy this definition, which is if the fraction of adversary validators F is less than T, then we get both of these properties. Now I'm going to decompose this. I'm going to sort of introduce two parameters instead, right? One is the safety resilience, one is the liveness resilience, right? Instead of applying this bound to both of these conditions, I'm going to say consensus security is parameterized in these two numbers, TS and TL. And I want safety to hold whenever F is less than TS. And I want liveness to hold whenever F is less than TL. Okay. And then I can very naturally ask, what pairs of these resiliences are achievable? What does the region look like for which there is a consensus problem that solves this problem formulation, this problem statement? So far clear? Okay. Interrupt me if there are any questions. Good. So now we can, we want to look at that, right? We want to look at the pairs of safety and liveness resilience that are achievable in each of these models. Right? And now we can go back to these numbers that we had, right? And we replace all of these numbers with regions. Okay, that's what we do in the paper, right? So every number now turned into a region plot. The blue areas are the ones that are achievable, right? So for the blue areas, there are protocols. And for the red areas, there are no protocols. We can tightly characterize it, right? So how is that related to the numbers that we saw before, right? If you put a diagonal through each of these plots, right, then the numbers that you saw before is sort of the point on that diagonal that is sort of the last blue point to the top right. Okay, so here for this setting, we saw that the threshold is 49%, right? That's what you get when you follow this diagonal up to the maximum point, right? That is what you get in Nakamoto or synchronous BFD. For the setting up here, right, the protocol that achieves this point in the corner here is a version of Dolev and Strong, right? Now something that is interesting, right? So previously we thought that here it's 49%, 49%, 49%, so all the same. But actually it's not all the same, right? So you see in this plot that interestingly, this point here seems to be achievable. And that one down here seems to be achievable, right? So there exist protocols that give you, this is under synchrony, right? That give you always safety and liveness up to 50% adversary. And there exist protocols that give you always liveness and safety up to 50% adversary.
So when you say communicating, you mean these clients communicating with each other, or clients communicate back to the consensus protocol proposal validator?
Both of these. So what I have in mind is that there is some sort of a gossip network where they can drop a message in, and all other honest parties, both honest clients and honest validators, will get that party delta time, that message delta time later.
So it's really much more than silent, because silent don't even talk to other clients.
Exactly. So silent only receive sort of stuff, kind of like unidirectionally, right, from the validators, potentially also from other clients, but and communicating clients can sort of broadcast to everybody else. It'll turn out that in this protocol, so we'll look at this protocol in a moment, all I need is that they can talk to other clients. Right, so the idea here is sort of, if you look at it from a practical perspective, right, most of these public blockchains, they have some sort of a gossip network where you just drop a message in, and then shortly thereafter, that should show up for everybody. Right? And that is sort of what we're interested in. Yeah.
All these figures, do you assume network is synchronous?
Yes, so good. For these figures here, these 4 figures, I'm assuming that the network is synchronous. We'll see more figures later because we look at the same problem also on the partial synchrony. And then, then the figures look different. But for this, at the moment, we are in the setting where the network is synchronous and all the validators are always awake. Okay? Later on, we'll also see what's called sleepy validators, right? But right now, the validators are all awake.
And if does the threshold applies to clients? Well, or only the validators?
Good. Yeah, so the threshold is only on the validators. For clients, we don't have a PKI and no thresholds. So there could be an arbitrary amount of malicious clients. There's no counting on like, okay, this many clients say this, those many clients say something else. It's only on validators.
So we talked about before that in many protocols, some node double as validator line or proposal.
Yes.
So in this model, you separate always.
Yeah, so
You
in this,
treat these are separate nodes.
yeah, I treat them as separate entities. If you have a solution for this, right, you can get an atomic broadcast protocol by just pairing a client with every validator. Right. But yes, here I treat them as sort of 2 separate functions.
But some constraint like being silent, assumption about the client being silent already rule out many.
That's right. Yeah. So what I think what you're pointing out is that if we're in, for example, the sleepy silent setting, right? Then if we do this kind of pairing the validator and the client, right, that would restrict the validator communication like a lot. Right. Yeah. That's right.
Same for always on.
That's right. Yeah. So in that sense, I would argue, maybe this is audacious, but I would argue that's why this is the right way to look at it. Because in this setting, I get to sort of decouple these 2 things sort of into 2 separate categories. And then, I can make assumptions on the clients that would look ridiculous if I made them in a combined setting, right? But maybe are useful in this separate setting. Awesome. Good question. Yeah, and then the last point on this slide is that, okay, for the setting here of always on and silent clients, we get the same behavior, it seems, as sleepy and silent in the setting. Okay. So now we want to look at this protocol up here in the corner. Okay. How do we get a protocol that is always safe and live if the adversary is less than 49% under synchrony and under full participation, no sleepy validation? Okay. So how do we do that? So we want to design a protocol. What's a protocol is a box where there's transactions coming in and logs coming out, right? And we want this box to have the property that the liveness resilience is 49% and the safety resilience is 100% or 99%. Right?
Just so we can get something that's always safe or always live.
No, I'm gonna get some. I'm here in this setting. I'm gonna get a protocol with 2 properties. One is no matter how strong the adversary is, the clients will never see conflicting outputs. And if the adversary is at most 49%, then the protocol is live. So if you put in transactions, then they are confirmed. Okay, so the second property rules out the fact that I only output ever empty logs, right? If I only had the safety, then I could get that by just never confirming anything. I need to confirm something if the adversary is less than 49%. And no matter how strong, how many validators are malicious, I will never output conflicting stuff, conflicting logs at the client. So here's how we do it. We start from any certifiable SMR protocol for the 49% setting. Pick your favorite protocol, synchronous hot stuff, for example, right? So certifiable just means whenever a log pops out of this protocol, right, you not only get a log, you also get some sort of a certificate that you can show to somebody else who is not like part of the system, and they'll be convinced that this protocol has actually decided this. Okay? So you run the transactions into such a protocol, you get out some internal log in, and then what you do is you gossip that, right? Remember, here we're in the communicating setting, right? So whatever comes out of the protocol, whatever I see as a client, I can drop that into the gossip network. Then I'm gonna wait a little bit. I'm gonna wait and hear if somebody else has something, that is conflicting, right? Together with a certificate, right? And if I don't hear anything conflicting, then I'm gonna output what I put into the gossip network. If I hear something conflicting, I just stop. I don't output stuff.
Sorry, dumb question, but how is the client sleepy in this case then?
The sleepiness means that this will also work if the client just wakes up at some like 5 years after the protocol has started.
So, but then it's not partaking in the active steps, right?
This protocol is run between the validators. The
Okay.
client will, if it wakes up, right, it'll see the confirmations that come out of here, right? So there is one assumption here, which is if you have a sleepy client and it wakes up, it sees all the messages that have happened in the past. Okay, so then it sees the confirmations that come out of this protocol, right? And from that moment on, it can participate in gossiping. Right?
And so, sorry, just to clarify the model, because we haven't seen as many examples. So there's a internal protocol that takes place between the validators. They send out messages to the clients, and the client, essentially, the log that is output is what is output by the clients and not by the validators. Is that?
Good, yeah, okay, maybe the way to think of it is the logic basically cuts here. Okay? Everything to the left of it is run by the validators, and everything to the right of it is run by the clients. Okay, so the validators are running this protocol. They produce output logs together with certificates. The clients get those. And then what the clients do is they first make sure that these are actually gossip. So they drop them into the gossip network, making sure that all other clients will also see the same logs soon after. And then they wait a little bit. And then if they don't hear anything conflicting, they output what they.
So the problem here is that if the validators cheat, then there may be two conflicting logins.
Yes, exactly.
So that's what you're trying to avoid. And if there is, right now, there's no resolution in this diagram yet.
This diagram solves it, but I haven't argued why.
Okay.
Yes, that's right, exactly. Okay, so this is the protocol. Okay, how does the protocol work? Okay, let's first look at the liveness. Why is this protocol live? Okay, so we assume that the adversary is less than 49%, right? Otherwise, we don't have to provide liveness here. Right? If the adversary is less than 49%, then this protocol is safe and live. Right? So whatever comes out of this protocol, all the logs that honest clients will ever see coming out of this protocol, they're all consistent. Okay? Then they gossip them, they wait a little bit, and they look for conflicts. There cannot be any conflicts because this protocol is safe. Right? So whatever sort of this detection will never see a conflict. Right? So whatever comes out of here will just be passed through sort of unchanged. Right? And whatever comes out of here is live because this protocol is live because the adversary is less than 49. Okay? We're happy with liveness. Now let's go to the safety part. So the safety part is more audacious. We need to show that no matter how strong the adversary is, right, the protocol is always safe. Two honest clients never output inconsistent stuff. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, let's suppose there are two clients that, we want to do a contradiction, right? Let's suppose there are two clients that output inconsistent stuff out here. Okay, inconsistent logs out here, right? One of them will be the first to output it. So let's look at that guy. Okay. So that guy outputs some log, right, at some point in time t. And then there's some other client that at a later point in time outputs a conflicting log prime, right? We want to show that that is not possible. Okay, so why is that not possible? Well, if this client outputs log, at this point in time, right? Then it, because of this waiting instruction, it must have seen that log as an output of log int, right, at least delta time ago. So then what did it do? Well, it gossiped that, right, and we're under synchrony, right? So that means this other fictitious client, right, that might have output something conflicting, later, right? That client will have seen this log, right, because of the gossip network, right, by this time t here, right? So at a later point in time, it would detect a conflict and not output anything.
100% threshold. Does that mean client or does that mean validator in the pi-int module?
Only validators. So for clients, we have no assumption how many that guys are.
Oh, okay. So then if it's 100% in the pi-int module, then this synchronous hot stuff no longer produce anything because that's on 49.
Correct. So if the adversary is very strong, like 100%, right? I don't get liveness anymore because it exceeds the liveness resilience.
Okay.
But I do get safety.
Okay. But why we worry about the client? We should be thinking about the synchronous hot stuff, right?
So what happens is that the synchronous in which setting in this?
I mean, in this setting, I mean, we are not talking about consensus protocol with all nodes, all validators being Byzantine.
That is what we can tolerate. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, but so why we worry about the clients? The first question is will pi-int still be safe, right?
Yes.
Even if all the validators are Byzantine.
Yes. That'll not be the, so here we've made the assumption that pi-int is just some 49% protocol. Right?
Oh.
So then this protocol will no longer be safe.
I just asked you whether 100% means validator or not.
Yeah.
The validator only appear in the pi-int box.
Yes. So
But then you just say the 49% of them has to be.
no, this is for liveness, right? So okay, so there's the question of liveness and
Right, let's
safety.
ignore liveness.
Let's ignore
Totally
liveness.
safety,
Okay.
right.
For safety, the state of affairs is we want to show even if every validator is malicious,
Mhm.
right? Then this protocol is not safe, it's not live. It can do whatever, right? This Python,
Okay,
because
I see.
it's both its safety and its liveness resilience is 49%.
Okay,
Right? So what comes out here is unsafe,
okay.
possibly unlive, right? But we only
Unsafe
care now.
meaning it could produce two logs.
Yes,
that are
conflicting
Yeah.
outputs, and both of
Okay.
them look certified.
Right, good.
And
Okay.
so now what I do on the client side is this sort of filtering, right?
Okay.
By using the synchrony assumption to make sure that unsafety doesn't pass through without the log.
Sorry, how can we confirm that all clients see the log if you have a client that's, say, sleeping for the entire duration of when it could see the log before its output?
Yeah, good. There's two questions here. One is, how can we make sure every client sees this? That's just assumption,
Okay,
right? So we make a synchronous network assumption. And so that means if any honest party drops a message into the gossip network at time t minus delta,
Yeah.
then delta time later, everybody has that message.
okay.
So that's an assumption. The other question, what about sleeping client? Right? So what about sleeping clients? Well, there is a client that outputs something, right? The only way in which it can output something is if delta time ago it gossiped that. So if you have a client that wakes up, it'll wake up, it'll get all the messages that were sent in the past. Right? So if in the past any client has confirmed something conflicting, right? It'll hear about that, and it'll just not confirm anything conflicting.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. Is the gossip network assumption like how does it work in practice?
How does that work in practice? Yes, that's a good question. So one reason why we're actually interested in this protocol is we talk, for example, to the people in the Cosmos ecosystem, and they have something like this. So when my colleagues were talking to them and said, hey, what happens to your protocol when more than 33% of nodes are malicious? They're like, no, we never output anything conflicting. Look, because in our code it says, if you ever see anything conflicting, then just panic and stop execution and stop outputting anything. Right? And that is actually a mechanism that looks kind of similar to this, right? It's a little bit like it doesn't exactly get those properties because they don't do this waiting thing before they confirm something on the regular confirmation path, right? But it's roughly there, right? And the key argument there is also, they say, look, we have this gossip network, right? If I see a certificate to confirm something, then shortly thereafter, everybody sees that certificate, right? And so before, if there are two clients that output conflicting stuff, right, then they will panic sort of in a very nearby sort of time interval, right? If two clients output stuff that is conflicting, so in their case, the output takes place, and then delta time later, they realize that they made a mistake, right? Because they see these two conflicting certificates and they're like, whoa, it shouldn't have happened, and then they panic and stop executing it. Right? So they have some sort of a mechanism like this, and because of that, we thought that like is a nice sort of match between theory and practice.
Yeah, so a couple slides ago, there was this 3-level diagram with the transactions, the validators, and the clients. Is that 3-level diagram what's happening in PyInt, or is it just the first two, like transactions and validators?
Oh, good, excellent. Yeah, in some sense, if I wanted to match these 3 stages to this, right, the transactions come in, the validators are running this PyInt, okay? The clients are recovering the output log, right? And then the rest is client logic.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so the sort of the transition from validator to client happens here. Okay, the validators are running the protocol, but the clients are the ones producing the internal log. Right? And then the clients get this internal log because the protocol is certifiable, and then the clients are running everything on the right hand side.
I guess the figure is still very confusing because this seems to be just showing one client, right? Each client is going to wait delta, see if there's an account.
Right.
And there's a lots of clients, right? So you mentioned that if there's a multiple clients running, and I guess you could totally create you could assume these two clients get 2 conflicting log, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course they only receive the one, so there's no conflict. So they were all output. So there's some assumption about weight delta box, which basically assumes there's nothing received within that weight delta, right? Every message, so you can only output the things you received the delta time before.
Yes, that is
Otherwise, right?
right. That would be the idea.
That's the point.
Exactly. Right. So the idea would be, as a client, you watch the protocol, right? If you see something come out of this internal protocol, you wait a little bit. You're like, this looks like it's confirmed, but let me see if somebody else has something conflicting.
Mm.
I'm gonna forward it. So make sure like go with it now, or like, say something now, or never say something. Right? And then you gossip it, and then you wait all the time, and then you output. Only if you don't hear anything from here. You don't hear any objection.
Seems like here, the gossip, by gossip, I think what you meant is some sort of broadcaster among clients, and you assume the broadcaster has nice properties like everyone sees the same block from.
So yes, it's broadcast, but it's just like, it's a very weak notion, okay? So I don't need any consistency, right? All I need is if an honest node drops a message in here, delta time later, everybody else has that message. There's no non-equivocation, there's no consistency, there's no, like, none of the, so there's no totality, none of the reliable broadcast stuff. It's only, the only property I need, if an honest node drops a message in here, delta time later, everybody has it.
It's possible that eclipse the client.
Yeah, then the synchrony assumption is violated, yes. Yeah. So if the synchrony assumption among the clients is violated, right, then a client could output stuff, and they put it into the gossip network delta time ago, but maybe they were eclipsed, right? The synchrony bound doesn't hold. So now they didn't forward, like the forwarded message didn't reach all the other honest clients, right? And now other honest clients can output conflicting stuff. Yeah, that's how this works.
I guess, I might be a misunderstanding of it, but so can you explain sort of what happens if a client that's sleeping receives in his mailbox or something, a conflicting message, or if that's not?
That can happen. So if a client, so you're worried about the case where a sleepy client wakes up.
Yeah.
Right, and you want to make sure that they will not output stuff that is inconsistent with what other nodes have already decided. Right. Okay, so let's look at that case, right? So an honest client wakes up. They receive all the messages from the gossip network, right? All the stuff that was sent in the past. Right? They will, before they confirm anything, they will wait delta time. Right? Make sure that these messages are actually gossip. Right? And only if they then still haven't seen anything conflicting, then they confirm.
And the other stuff that he might have received earlier that's conflicting, it's already confirmed, so it's.
Yeah, so if an honest node has confirmed something in the past, right, then they have also gossiped it, right? Then our sleepy client who just wakes up gets that message, right? And then he gets it in time. He will never output anything conflicting going forward.
Just one more question about the model between the validators and the clients. Is the idea that each validator is sort of in charge of like end client, so to speak, and they only talk to them? Or like how does the login get transmitted to the client?
Think of it just as like, if you want, think of it just as this broadcasting. Okay, so it's basically what honest validators will do is whenever they vote, right, they drop their vote into the gossip channel, right? And whenever they see a vote from other adversary, like from other parties, right, they also drop it into the gossip channel. Right? So any votes that are sort of happening between validators as part of this protocol, right, they make it to the clients, and the clients use those in order to.
Basically, like every validator communicates with every client.
Like all the honest validators will send any message that they see to the clients, yeah, to the honest. Good. Okay. Awesome. We'll have to be careful about time. Good. So we have explained this point here. Now we can do this. Let's talk briefly about the protocol here. Okay. So we now want. We're still in the sleepy communicating client setting, still with synchrony, right? We want to have a protocol that is always live. Okay? A protocol where the liveness resilience is 100% and the safety resilience is 49%. Okay, how do we build that? Okay, so when transactions come in, okay, this is now the setting where clients also see transactions. Okay? Clients see transactions. Transactions enter the system. Everybody sees there's a mempool, right? Everybody sees all the transactions. Or if you will, make it part of the protocol that honest validators forward transactions to clients. Right? These transactions get gossiped, right? So again, delta time later, everybody has those transactions, right? And then those transactions are input to this internal protocol. And now as an internal protocol, again, we use our favorite synchronous protocol, say, so hot stuff, right? With 49% resilience. Right? That gives us some output log, right? And at the same time, we take note of all the transactions that we see circulating. Okay, so transaction comes in, I'm going to record the time I saw this transaction for the first time, right? And the philosophy of the protocol is the following. I'm going to record the time when I saw this transaction for the first time. I'm going to give this protocol a chance to confirm that transaction, to decide where in the output log this transaction should land. Okay. We're under synchrony, right? So I have a worst case bound on how long this will take. Right? There is a bound deconf, a maximum time after which, if this protocol is actually live, if the adversary is less than 49%, this protocol should confirm. And then what I'm going to do is, after that time, I'm going to check for every transaction that I took note of. Is this transaction confirmed yet? Yes or no? Okay, and then I'm going to take all the transactions that aren't confirmed, right? These are transactions, they were input long time ago, and still, for some reason, they aren't confirmed. That's like very suspicious, right? That should only happen if this protocol is no longer live. Then what am I going to do with these transactions? I'll just put them somewhere in my output log. That sounds crazy. So I merge my overdue pending transaction, but actually it satisfies these properties. And we can look at why, right? So let's look at the liveness side of things, right? A transaction comes in. Well, this transaction either will be picked up by this protocol, no matter, like, we have no bound on the adversary, right? We want to show liveness even if the adversary is controls all the validators here, right? Either the transaction gets picked up here, or the transaction eventually is overdue. Right? If it gets picked up here, well, then it just goes into the output log. So it's confirmed, so we have liveness. If it is overdue, it's not confirmed within the confirmation time, then I just put it into my output log, so it's in my output log. We have liveness.
Did we need the logs to always have the transactions in the same order, or was that a constraint for something else?
No, this is, we only want to argue liveness right now, right? We'll get to safety in a moment, right?
Oh.
But for liveness, all I need to show you is no matter how strong the adversary is, eventually every input transaction will make it to the output. It's sort of a, yeah, and that's the case. Right, so on the safety side, right now I get to assume that the adversary is less than 49%, at most 49%, right? Then this protocol is safe and live. Right? We're on the synchrony, so this protocol has some tconf maximum delay bound, right? So any transaction, so it has a maximum delay bound, which means that the set of overdue transaction is always empty, right? Because any transaction that ever entered will just be confirmed by this protocol, because this protocol is live, right? So there will never be a transaction that remains unconfirmed for more than tconf time. If there are no overdue pending transactions, this injection procedure does nothing, right? So all that does is output what comes out of here, but what comes out of here under this assumption is safe, right? So there are no transactions that are ever overdue and pending, and so the output log is the internal log, and that one is safe, and so we're done.
It assumes that all the transactions are included by the host instances.
Yes, that's right, yes.
But in reality, that may not be the case.
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah, so we're operating in the infinite block size regime here, right? Otherwise, this you don't have, if you have finite block size, you can't accommodate every transaction. You don't have this delay bound. I have not thought about that setting.
It seems like in that setting, it's hard to, let's say there are 2 transactions remaining, it's hard to determine the ordering of these 2.
Yeah, okay, so I mean, we can think a little bit about sort of what happens in this setting, right? You could, for example, say, okay, I'm only going to inject transaction if they offered such a high fee that they should have been confirmed, but still somehow weren't confirmed. Right? You need to somehow have some sort of a notion of, okay, so you need to have some handle on what are the transactions that the protocol should have been confirming if the adversary was less than 49%. Right? And only those you should inject later on, right? Because only if those are not confirmed, that's an indication that this bound is violated. And if that bound is violated, I no longer have to provide safety. I only need to provide liveness. And so it's okay if I put the transactions in. Okay, good. This is as technical as it gets. I have one more impossibility argument later, but we can see where we are time-wise. So far, right, we have talked only about synchronous networks. There's also partially synchronous networks. Okay? So we also look at this. This is now sort of network models, or previously we've talked about client models, right? We had these 2 dimensions, communicating or silent, sleepy or non-sleepy, like always on, right? And then there's sort of 2 more dimensions that concern the network on the one side, right? Do we have synchrony, meaning this delay bound always holds, or do we only have partial synchrony, meaning this delay bound holds sometimes, but sometimes not, right? And then there is a second dimension sort of on the kind of more validator side, which is validator sleepiness, right? So far we have assumed that validators are always on. They're always taking part in the protocol. There's also this setting that has been studied recently, very much inspired by blockchains like Bitcoin and Ouroboros, for example, which is called sleepy validators, right? What happens if the nodes that are running the protocols, these nodes themselves, they go to sleep every now and then, right? So the space of models becomes a little bit bigger, right? So we have 16 different models, right? They all have some relation of which one is easier than which. And then we can plot these nice little diagrams for each of them, each of these settings, right? And if you want to enjoy this, then check out the paper. I
Are the
think,
proofs there as well?
say again?
Are the proofs in there?
Yes, so this is tightly characterized for all of these settings. Yeah, so we know, so many of these results are old results, right? This is not, not all of this is new, right? This, in some sense, when we wrote this paper, it's kind of interesting because it's like almost like an SOK for this kind of, adversary majority kind of consensus. Like for example, if you have an impossibility result in a very kind of strong client model, right, then that also translates kind of to the weaker client models. The other way around with achievabilities, right? And then from this, you get parts of these regions, and then for other parts of the regions, you needed some new protocols or some new impossibility results. And the end of it is that we have full characterization for all of these models, both on the validator side and on the client side. So what we've thought so far, right, is basically this row, right? It's the synchronous and always on validator setting for all the different clients. What's also interesting is we look at the synchronous and sleepy validator setting. We realize that this always safe protocol that we've seen before can no longer be done. We can talk a little bit about why that is. Actually, frankly, we do. So why is that, right? So this point doesn't work in that setting anymore, in the sleepy validator setting. And that's because we've made the assumption that this protocol is certifiable. And we don't get certifiability anymore in this so-called sleepy setting. Right? Sleepy setting is where, maybe 90% of your think of like Bitcoin, right? In Bitcoin, the mining rate fluctuates wildly over time, right? If you wanted to model something similar in a proof of stake setting, right? Then you would say, okay, suppose I have a set of validators, right? But some of them are just not showing up, they're crashed, right? And then you can say, okay, I want to lump them into the Byzantine validators, but maybe like they vary a lot, right? Like maybe 90% of your validators could be crashed, right? Then you can't lump them into the Byzantine setting, then you don't get security anymore. It turns out in the sleepy setting, where you treat them sort of separately as crashed validators, you do get properties, right? But in that setting, we don't have certifiable protocols anymore, and so this construction doesn't work anymore. I have an impossibility argument. I'll give it quickly. Let's see how this goes. So it's not just the construction that breaks down. It's actually there cannot be a protocol that achieves that. And so let me make that point clear, right? So in the sleepy validator synchronous setting, right, the always safe and live up to 49% protocol is no longer possible. Okay? Not just our protocol doesn't do it, nobody can do it. Okay. And here's why. Okay. So suppose we had a protocol that did it, right? I want to get to a contradiction. Okay? I want to show you that that cannot be, right? Something must be inherently contradictory, right? So suppose we had, for sleepy communicating clients under synchrony and with sleepy validators, right? We had a protocol that can do something in this upper triangle here. Okay? We want to show that that is impossible. Right? So let's take a protocol where the safety resilience is beta, or some beta somewhere between 0.5 and 1. And the liveness resilience is 1 minus beta, right? So it's something that is just above that curve there. Okay? So here's how we get to contradiction. We need to look at four different executions. Okay, in execution number 1, okay, we partition our validators into set P and Q. Set P has beta validators. Set Q has 1 minus beta validator, and there is a client. Okay. Let's say these validators are sleeping. Okay, they're just crashed. These validators get input transaction TX. Protocol runs. Well, there's not even Byzantine adversaries, right? So definitely this client has to output something, right? If this is a protocol that works in the sleepy validator setting, then this client has to eventually confirm transaction 1. I can do the same game sort of in execution 2, right? I just swap sides. Okay, now P is sleepy, the P nodes are sleepy, the Q nodes are active. They get an input TX2, then the client has to output TX2 eventually. That should be clear. So let's look at execution tree. In execution tree, yeah, with PQ, we have 3 clients now. Okay, the client in the middle is sleepy. Okay, he only joins the execution at some later point in time. Okay, the nodes in Q are malicious, and the client here also behaves maliciously. That's possible, right? Like this client can just, you know, like there could be a client that just relays stuff. There isn't much that a client can do, simply because it cannot sign stuff, right? It doesn't have a public key that would be known to other nodes, but it's okay, right? There can be a malicious client. Right? And what are these nodes going to do? They're going to behave like the honest validators and the honest client in execution 2. Right? They're going to pretend they don't hear from P, right? And they just run their own execution where they got as input transaction 2. Okay? And there's really an input transaction 1 into P, right? Now, this execution from the perspective of this client, right, looks like this execution. Right? So it has to confirm TX1. Right? On the other hand, there's the last execution, execution 4. Right? Trick is always something symmetric, right? So what happens here? Again, the client in the middle is sleepy. He only joins later. The clients on the node participants on the left this time are Byzantine, right? They behave like the nodes over here, right? And there's an input TX2 on the nodes on the right-hand side. So what needs to happen? Well, this execution to this client looks like that execution, right? So they definitely have to output TX2. Okay. And now, you know, these outputs have happened. Now the client in the middle wakes up. Okay. For the second half of the executions, execution 3 and execution 4, and the strategy of the Byzantine nodes changes. The Byzantine nodes now behave like the honest nodes are behaving in the continuation of this execution. And the same sort of swapped on the other side. Okay. And then what happens? Well, this client now needs to output something, right? Why does he need to output something? Well, you know, the beta is between a half and 1, right? So 1 minus beta is between 0 and a half, right? But in one of these executions, we require liveness, right? So definitely it's not okay if this third client outputs nothing in that execution, right? So he has to output something, but what should the person output? You know, they have to output TX1 in this setting. They have to output TX2 in this execution in the first position. Otherwise, you break safety, but safety is required in both of these because beta is between half and 1. Right? And in particular, beta is then greater than 1 minus beta. So that's a contradiction.
So if TL is 1 minus beta, does that mean that the number of adversarial validators is bounded by 1 minus beta?
The fraction of adversary validators is bounded by that, yes.
So if
in these executions, nobody is asleep, right, among the validators. So they're just, yeah.
So TL has to be less than TX, right? Since 1 is between 0 and 1/2, 1 is between 1/2 and 1.
Yes, correct.
So then how can we have beta adversarial validators in execution 4?
Good, very good. So all I need, right, is one of these executions, right, the liveness resilience is satisfied. Right. So in one of these, let me be precise, in this execution, right? So in this execution, I have 1 minus beta adversary validator. Yeah. So in this execution, this client needs to be live. Right? So he needs to output TX1. Okay. He needs to output TX1. So either he outputs TX1 in the first position of his log, right? Or he doesn't output TX1 in the first position. But in both of these executions, that client needs to be safe with respect to the other client. Right? Because beta is between half and 1, and in particular, beta is greater than 1 minus beta. Right? So in both of these executions, that client in the middle has to be consistent with the other honest client, right? Which would mean in this execution, you would have to put TX1 in the first position. That's for sure because of the liveness. And then in that execution, he would have to put tx2 in the first position, and that's a contradiction because both of these executions look the same to that number.
It's pretty cool.
Yes, yeah, he was telling me, get off the stage. So I'm about to close. So yeah, so so I've shown you the impossibility, right? On the achievability, we talked about the fact that, you know, there are no certifiable protocols, so you need to do something. There is a way to construct a protocol that sort of matches that impossibility. I'm sure it can be done with a bunch of protocols. We know this protocol well, so we use this in order to construct that achievability here, right? And that's the other example that I wanted to show you about this. The last point I want to make is about the lower two rows here, right? These are in partially synchronous setting. And the thing you should take away is that it seems like the curves aren't changing dependent on the client model, right? And so that's, you know, partial synchrony seems to be robust to these assumptions that we make about the client model. And maybe that gives you some sense for why, you know, people like to kind of work in that setting, right? Whereas as soon as you assume synchrony, it starts to matter what other assumptions you're making about your clients. That's the key takeaway. If you want to know more, including all the details of that impossibility argument, check out the paper. Thank you.
But it seems like there's no reason why we should prefer synchronous over partially synchronous, right? I mean, under what a realistic setting, synchronous is more preferable than partial synchronous.
Yeah, I mean that's a philosophical argument.
Oh.
I mean I think
I mean usually you would think you know the word is asynchronous, right? And you know partial synchronous is something more realistic, and synchronous is purely for academics writing beautiful papers, right? So if your results seems to say, you know, why we bother synchronous at all? You know, let's just.
I think that is one interpretation.
Okay.
Let me push back on the other
Okay.
side a little bit, right?
Right.
If I look at the internet, it depends on what my delta is, right? But for like fairly large delta, it seems the world is fairly synchronous. Like the internet rarely really catastrophically breaks
Yeah, but
down.
if you want your system run for long enough time, then surely things will crash and something will happen, right? Our planet Earth only have finite lifetime. Anyway.
That's right. Yeah, that I think, I mean, yeah, that's a bit of a, hard to say. I do think it makes sense to study synchronous protocol.
Sure. Okay, but only for theoretical interest.
Even for practical interest,
Okay.
right? Bitcoin still is running a synchronous protocol.
Okay.
So the first two columns of these are also the same. Is there any similar robustness claim you can make for that? Just like the bottom two rows?
It just seems like if the clients communicate, it actually helps you.
Yeah, I think that is sort of the takeaway that we have in the paper is that if you're silent, it doesn't really matter that much whether you're always following or whether you're sleepy. Right? That I guess is the takeaway you should have. Yeah, definitely. I think the key takeaway is so in my mind, communicating clients are quite realistic. Like I would not, like if I had to design a system, I would probably not want to design a system that critically hinges on clients always being following the system, always on. I think it's a realistic, plausible assumption to assume that if a client is in the system, then they can sort of rebroadcast stuff. And then the synchrony bound sort of holds for them. I think those are realistic assumptions that hold pretty much all the time in like these large scale systems like public blockchains. And so I do think that in particular, the CB communicating client model is an interesting model to think about. That would be my personal take.
Let's thank you, Joachim, again.